When I hear Charlie Parker, what goes through my mind is the epitome of what jazz is supposed to be. We're talking about an unbelievable amount of soul. We're talking about a guy that is able to express himself so purely.
The beauty of his sound, it's very beautiful, very lyrical, and his clarity in his communication of ideas from his mind through his heart to his horn. The connection sounds and feels complete.
I would put it like maybe George Orwellian, to where he really is a future teller. It's there, sure, documented in 1947, but really it's like so far valid beyond 2027. There's an entire universe that exists inside of what he presents within a 5-second span, even less, to be honest.
You Google great alto saxophone break, and what comes up is what he did when Dizzy Gillespie and him recorded Night in Tunisia. A break in the that's where at the end of the course they give you 2 bars or 4 bars, sometimes even 8 bars to enter your solo. 3, 4. What he did in them 4 bars, everybody is still talking about. Google it. Don't listen to me.
Charlie Parker was born August 29, 1920 at 852 Freeman in Kansas City, Kansas, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment above a grocery store. And his grandmother lived up the hill, and his half-brother lived up the hill, and they'd get together and play in front of his house. He called his half-brother Ike. And he lived there until 1927, when his family moved to Kansas City, Missouri.
Bird had those experiences similar to the ones I had. You know, elementary school band, starting an instrument early. Those things, you know, music was very strong back then, and that's part of being in Kansas City, having a strong instrumental program.
Charlie first picked up the saxophone when he was in 5th grade, when the Kansas City School District instituted the music program in Penn School. And his mother bought him a $40 horn in a pawn shop, and Lawrence Keyes described as being ragged as a pet monkey. He grew up in the heyday of Kansas City jazz. When he was coming up, Benny Moten was really at its peak. The Moten Band was at its peak. Kansas City was a hotbed for jazz because of Pendergast's prosperity. The government fostered vice and corruption, and there were clubs stretching from the river out south in the county to 75th Street. Mary Lou Williams recalled 50 clubs featuring live music between 12th and 18th Street, and vices of all kinds were available. On 15th Street was the red light district to stretch for blocks from downtown. 12th Street was just a line of clubs. Dave Dexter estimated there were as many as 20 clubs in a single block. There were also gambling in the front windows, and any kind of vice you wanted. Marijuana was readily available, as was narcotics. And so musicians from the southwestern territories came to Kansas City where they could find work.
It's inconceivable to imagine a Charlie Parker being born in Oklahoma or Philly or any place else and being able to nurture his art on that level. And not that there wasn't great jazz going on in Philly or a lot of other places, but here in Kansas City at that time, when you have all this row of clubs and they're going all night long, 7 days a week.
And he began playing as a teenager when he was 15 years old. His first group was called 10 Chords of Rhythm, later the 12 Chords of Rhythm, a group led by Lawrence Keyes that played, well, right across the street at 18th and Vine in the Lincoln Building at Lincoln Hall. And it was a kid band, and they were non-union, but they made more money than union members because they played for the door. And it was a very popular hall for Lincoln High School students. And so they would pack the place, and that's really where he got his start professionally.
I've been listening to Charlie Parker since I was, ever since I can remember. He was a friend of my father and my mother's. He used to drive us down through all the areas where the Cherry Blossom and where the Reno Club and the Hey Hey Club. He used to tell us about these places.
His favorite roost was above balcony above the Reno Club bandstand, where the marijuana smoke from the Basie band smoking reefers on the bandstand would waft upstairs.
This was their heyday. They tell us about the all-night jam sessions in the Reno Club where you could buy reefer in it and and stuff. That's part of the menu. He came from an era that was very unforgiving too. And I know that just from listening to my father and his friends talk about me. And so, I mean, I didn't get a free pass with my dad and his friends when I was learning how to play. Either you saying something or you're not. And I'm sure Charlie Parker's era, because these are the guys of his era that were molding my way of thinking.
In spring of 1936, he sat in on a jam session at the Reno Club where the Basie band was playing. And he faltered while soloing on Honeysuckle Rose, forgot the changes, and Joe Jones threw a cymbal at his feet.
You know, everybody wants to talk about when Charlie Parker got gonged by Joe Jones, but the part that you don't realize is he was back the next night or the week later. And he had done that, and this particular Joe Jones said, I can't hear this no longer. But it don't mean that he can't come back. It just means, okay, we've had enough tonight, Bird, gotta go.
He was publicly humiliated, but also it inspired him to go to the woodshed, as musicians would say, to practice his horn. So he retreated to Addie's house, and he played his horn sometimes 12 to 14 hours a day. And he said he would never get caught short again. So Joe Jones actually did him a big favor by humiliating him publicly.
They like WHDH.
Another thing that's been a major factor in your playing is this fantastic technique that nobody's quite equaled. And I always wondered about that too, whether that came behind practicing, or whether that was just from playing, whether it evolved gradually.
Well, you make it so hard for me to answer, because I can't see where there's anything fantastic about it at all. I put quite a bit of study into the horn, that's true.
Uh-huh.
In fact, the neighbors threatened to ask my mother to move once when I was living out west. I mean, they said I was driving them crazy with the horn. I used to put in at least 11 to 15 hours a day.
Yeah, that's what I wondered.
Well, that's true, yes. I did that for over a period of 3 or 4 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
If you listen to the precision, the specific nature of everything, the dexterity, like you can't do that without thousands of hours of practice in a particular isolated space and thousands of hours of actual application in public or whatever type of like communal spaces with other people. That's the only way you get to that level. It's not, natural talent only serves you so far. Hard work is the thing that really is like the germinating factor for I think, the seed that you're planting in the ground.
Study is absolutely necessary in all forms. It's just like any talent that's born within somebody. It's just like a good pair of shoes when you put a shine on it, Schooling brings out the polish, of any talent that happens anywhere in the world. Einstein had schooling, but he has a definite genius, within himself. Schooling is one of the most wonderful things there's ever been,
Everybody knew Charlie Parker would be down in the park. Back then they used to call it Paseo Park. Now they call it Parade Park. Back in Paseo Park, he'd be practicing his horn in the afternoon, just in the park practicing. Him and my dad were real good friends. He used to call my father Sir James. He used to go swing by the park and pick up Bird, and Charlie Parker be in the, wouldn't miss a lick, he'd still keep practicing. And so he'd be riding through the neighborhood in his convertible with my mom and Charlie Parker playing. And in my mind, I'm like, oh my God. That was just an example of how you always knew what Charlie Parker was doing. He was always playing. So he's at the park practicing all day, playing, sitting in the park all day playing, and then at night, he, once Basie and them struck up, or Jay McShann, or anybody that's got the hidden bands, he go from place to place, sitting in with everybody all night long. And so he lived it. And he's a perfect example of an artist living it. I mean, and he said that. He said, if you don't live it, it won't come out your horn.
There's a number of watershed incidents in Charlie's life. He was on his way to a gig at Musser's Ozark Tavern, which was 5 miles south of Eldon, Missouri. And the car flipped over and threw him out of the car, and it killed George Wilkerson, the leader, and threw his buddy Ernie Daniels 60 feet into a plowed field, and it broke Charlie's ribs and it broke his back. And it destroyed his horn, so Mr. Musser bought him a new Selmer, which gave him a lift, but it also gave him a habit because they prescribed heroin for his pain, and he developed a taste of heroin, and he struggled with that the rest of his life.
And I feel like that other side is like what people target a lot when they speak about Charlie Parker. All I know is that what was left for me to examine is this wonderful body of work. Genre-wise, whatever I could ever sound like, it's only important that everyone knows it would not exist if it was not for Charlie Parker.
It's so authentic. It's so real. It's so raw. It's perfect. Even the squeaks and the bad notes are perfect because that's what life is. That's the scars that we get. They represent our experiences. And Charlie Parker, when you hear him play, you hear the scars, you hear the laughter, you hear the pain, you hear the beauty, you hear all of it. And there are very few musicians that can do it as obviously and as profound. And he's not even a singer. He does it with an inanimate object. When
I reference my horn, I say, I'm gonna go spend some time with my horn versus I'm going to go practice my horn. And that changes everything because the relationship with the instrument, and my instrument in particular, is a relationship. It's just that. It's not a practice session. The instrument knows when you love it, and it'll beat you up if you take 2 weeks off and you try to come back. It's like any relationship. You don't call somebody for 2 weeks, you're supposed to call, they know that's the nature of your relationship. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. I mean, this horn is taking me all around the world all the time because the one thing that exists all around the world for sure are jazz festivals, jazz scenes, music, arts. I can go anywhere in the world, not speak the language, but if I have this horn, I immediately will have a life. Love you, Bird.
Ultimately, all of this plumbing and metal and stuff is supposed to be an extension of you. The ultimate goal is to express yourself, whether you're doing it with a trumpet or a saxophone or a piano. It had, in their time, it had no value to be able to say, I sound just like Duke Ellington, or this guy here sounds just like Lester Young, or he's just like Pops. That has really no value in the big picture of what jazz is about, or any art. I wanna hear you. I wanna get to know you. So if you can paint just like Picasso, at best, you can only become a second best Picasso.
Our power is moving the air with sound. You know, listening to a record, that moves the air too, but being in front of live music in a room where the air is being transformed and the molecules are being transformed by the sound, that's an experience, you know, live.
And then the third watershed period in his life is the summer of 1937, when he went with George E. Lee's band back to Musser's Ozark Tavern. And, you know, that's in an area known as Little Dixie, with sundown communities where African Americans better not be caught after dark. And so they stayed on site and kept a low profile, and Charlie spent all of that summer practicing.
Charlie Parker is somebody that was born basically right at World War I. He lived and died only ever seeing black only and white only everything. So he never knew anything else except this.
That's the way it was, and that's the way it still is. It's not so overt. And for a black person, it'll drive you crazy. Trying to keep your eye on what's real and hesitating to judge people and struggling to trust people. While being on the lookout for the elephant in the room. I think our biggest problem now, the unconscious racism. I like to say racism. You know, the unconscious racism. To call somebody a racist, I think that's more extreme. That has a definition, but racism shows itself in many ways without white people ever knowing.
I grew up here. Why didn't I learn about Charlie Parker growing up?
Okay, let's have some real conversation. I grew up in Kansas City. Had it not been for my father, I wouldn't even know about the history of Kansas City jazz. One of the greatest jam sessions that ever took place in the history of jazz took place right here in Kansas City around the 18th and Vine Street area between Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young. All of that was erased. I think that the people that are influential in deciding the image that they want Kansas City to have wanted to erase that whole Pendergast era, the whole 18th and Vine Street, people going partying all night and jazz going on. I think, you know, they want to be known as the city of fountains, and they want to have a statue of Winston Churchill on the Country Club Plaza. Now, I got nothing against fountains or Winston Churchill, but the bottom line is that who has more to do with our authentic history, Charlie Parker, Winston Churchill? What image do people think of worldwide when they think of Kansas City? Do they think of jazz, or do they think of the fountains? Again, it's hard to not be somewhat blunt. I think because a lot of it is black history.
Because it was black music, man. That's it. You know? It's that simple. We're influenced by what we see and what we hear. I mean, I wish I could think of another reason. You know, I don't have to get angry. I don't need a soapbox. You know, I don't need a podium, because that's not what I'm about. You know, when people come to the gig, they want to hear music, but you still have an obligation to make them think, to make them reminisce, to make them dream, to make them forget. That's our job. You know, that's our calling, and that's what I heard from Bird. You know, and as we circle back. That's all in Bird, what I'm talking about, you know? The jazz musicians and Charlie Parker and them, that's why when they got on the stage and they played, that was a beacon of hope and light, you know? And you could see all that, their pain and their struggles and their triumph over adversity. That's what that was. When they asked me about Bird, I hear triumph over adversity, you know? And it was in all of them. You know, some people like to step around things. You can't. You got to go through things to get to yourself. Because no one just rises out of the ground. You know, you got to come through something.
Back to Mustard's Ozark Tavern, Charlie spent all of that summer practicing. And he began experimenting with the changes and different harmonic approach that would lead to bebop. He learned all the chords and all the inversions when he was down there. He mastered his horn and returned to Kansas City just a musically changed man.
He was one of the fellas, you know, and you know, he got, even the way he got that nickname, that tells you who he was. He's a country boy.
In 1930, there was a stage production at Penn School, and Charlie and the other kids were out playing in the yard. The other boys were out playing in the yard, and the band director, music director, said, "Hey, you little yardbirds," talking about chickens, "get in here." And Charlie, who loved chickens, got a kick out of it, and so he began referring to chickens as yardbirds. And in the fall, I think it was of 1940, the McShann Band was on its way to play for Big Red up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they were traveling caravan style in cars, and the car Charlie was riding in ran over a chicken. And he begged the driver to come back, to go back and retrieve the bird.
You riding in the car, you hit a chicken, you say, "Hey, whoa, stop. I want that." One man's roadkill is another man's meal. So, I mean, you know, they hit her chicken. He decides we're gonna pick it up, and when they get to where they're gonna get the lady to cook it for him. That was why they started calling him Yardbird, which eventually got to be Bird.
In those big bands, they were primarily playing for dancers. Duke and Count Basie, a lot of their gigs, in fact, all their gigs probably were dance gigs. And so that means people were listening with their bodies. And I think the difference between that era and the bebop cats, they wanted people to listen with their ears, not just feel the music, but hear the music.
I think that's why so many intellectuals and beatniks, hip cats were all attracted to it, and artists, because it was an original expression of music. And it forced you to listen. You know, that whole thing about, chasing the bird, If you heard Bird, he would immediately get your attention, and you would immediately focus on him because of what he was coming out of his horn.
The tempos went up, and then the melodies got more complicated. Like, for instance, this is like swing era. And then Bird and them took that same progression and they sped it up. And they put another melody on top of it so they wouldn't have to pay royalties. So then you get like, I think it's Scrapple from the Apple. See? You see, that's the difference right there. The tempo and the melodies were more rhythmic, and then they were original material. They wrote a lot of original material in the bebop era.
Charlie was playing bebop in Kansas City. Claude Williams and Jay McShann both told me that. The older musicians, there was no name for it then, and he was really the pioneer. And the older musicians called it crazy music. There's a couple of recordings of him performing one called Honeysuckle Rose, Body and Soul. It was probably recorded in 1938. That shows him moving in that direction. And recently we came across a recording of him playing I'm Getting Sentimental Over You in February of 1941, where he goes in and out of keys, uses 16th notes, all the tricks of the trade are there in his solo. It's quite a revelation. He'd been smoking reefers and drinking for a number of years, but when he got that taste of heroin, and the heroin was readily available. A musician called Bud Calvert talked about how he would take Charlie down to Columbus Park to score his heroin. Kansas City was wide open, so anything was available. And I think one of the reasons he left is because he left about the same time the cleanup occurred, and sources of heroin dried up. And also gigs dried up. That's one of the things that drove him out of town.
Everybody had to get to New York, and I think Monk was a big magnet, for these young people. He provided validation, cover, and opportunities and freedom for these young folks to play. And they formed a community and they shared their ideas. Miles went there from St. Louis. A lot of people came from other places to go to New York.
Difficult things about getting to the essence of Charlie Parker is stripping away the myths that's been wrapped around him over the years.
You know, that sounds more like, you know, like Monotapa foot in the forest, like a little bit. They talk about how he always kept Stravinsky's Firebird Suite in his back pocket.
The house was almost full. As Charlie Parker Quintet walked onto the bandstand, the trumpeter, Red Rodney, recognized Stravinsky. So he whispered over to Bird, "Hey, Stravinsky's sitting there." Charlie Parker immediately called, and it was customary that he would do this. Coco is built on the chord changes of Cherokee. Back then, that was one of that's still like a rite of passage song. Said he played at over 300 beats per minute. So he's up. I can't even hardly hum it. Okay, in the middle of this fast song, Charlie Parker jumps in his solo and is going at this breakneck speed. And then at the beginning of his second course, he inserted the opening of Stravinsky's Firebird Suite. How do you do that? How do you think so fast? Stravinsky's in the audience. Immediately, Stravinsky started pounding the table, and they said, of the people that were there, they said that he's knocked his drink all over the people sitting next to him. People are like, you know, but he was so blown away, he went to hear this jazz musician that he'd been hearing about. And now, to hear him live sitting up there, he's sitting out here, and now all of a sudden at this breakneck speed in the middle of his improvisation, he plays one of his compositions, spontaneously. I don't even know anybody that can do that kind of stuff. And I've been playing my whole life, and I'm over 30. So it's like, I can do some things, and I know a lot of real good musicians. I hear the great musicians of our time, and I don't have to name people. We know who they are. And I've been in jam sessions with some of them. But I don't know very many. That's hedging the bet. I don't know any that could do that. That I can honestly say, I bet so-and-so could do that. And he did this. This is just one story. There are many stories that Dizzy Gillespie has told, Red Rodney has told, Louis Hayes, Art Blakey. All of his peers have told different things that he did in the middle of a solo in the night that made all of them say, "What?"
you know, he had an addictive personality, and it did him in. He flew very high for a very short period of time. And so his third wife, Doris, and his mother, Addie, brought him back to Kansas City after the memorial service in Harlem. And he was buried here in Lincoln Cemetery. According to family members, Addie buried him under a tree so he'd always be in the shade and wouldn't be hot during the summer. And she wanted to be buried next to him too. I mean, she loved Charlie. She doted on Charlie. And Charlie loved his mother. He called her every Sunday, regardless of where he was. And so in a lot of ways it was right that he came back here.
But here in Kansas City, you go out to his grave, you can't find it. There's no proper marker at that cemetery. I've been out several times. There's a tenor saxophone engraved on his grave instead of an alto saxophone. There's no headstone. You know, if you go to Père Lachaise, the famous cemetery in Paris, go and look at Chopin's grave site. It's like a whole, it's not even a memorial, it's like literally like a small church itself, you know what I mean? Like, it's just this tiny, but it's so majestic. And I feel like we don't take advantage of these things in which we could, you know? We could be better.
There's music before Charlie Parker, there's music after Charlie Parker. Like Mozart, he's a transitional figure. And he not only influenced the subsequent generations of musicians, he influenced writers, he influenced painters, poets, dancers. He influenced all art.
There would be no Jimi Hendrix without Charlie Parker. There's no Donny Hathaway with Charlie Parker. There's no Basquiat without Charlie Parker. It doesn't exist. It's clear, like no one would even debate that. It's hard to get people to really understand this base because I think that once you're in that deep, you realize that there's no isolating him without looking at the broad level in which he reached, you know?
He's easily the biggest icon from Kansas City. I mean, when I started traveling, going to Japan and Europe, when I mentioned I'm from Kansas City, the first thing they said, oh, Charlie Parker. You know, it's like, it didn't matter what part of the world I'm at. Charlie Parker he has reached a level that we all want to attain as artists.
Hi, my name is Eugene Cantera. I play saxophone. I love the album Charlie Parker Plays Cole Porter so much that I named my son Parker Cole.
I remember as a young teenager listening to Charlie Parker, particularly his LP, Charlie Parker with Strings, the song April in Paris. I was just hooked. I've listened to that record more than 250 times. Just lovely.
Hello from Manchester in the United Kingdom. I'm Sam Q, a jazz saxophonist for almost 40 years. I first got started playing saxophone when I listened to a record called Scrapple from the Apple from the great Charlie Parker, aka The Bird. His skill and dexterity and substitution of chords was immense. Without Charlie Parker, jazz would not have gone into the modern day era. He's a pioneer and a great figure in jazz music.
The first time I knew something about Charlie Parker was when I started my career at the jazz school. And it was just an experience of first time. I listened to Lady Bird, but it was more important that Charlie taught me the right way to make a jazz solo. Making jazz solo is not only to play randomly notes, it's to speak with an instrument, it's to feel.
Mi nombre es Antonio Garzueta y vivo en Santiago de Chile. Mi introducción a Charlie Bird Parker fue con el disco Bird and This, y desde entonces he estado 100% enfocado a la escucha de estos músicos. Como muchos amantes de su música, he encontrado profunda intensidad en sus registros y en su persona. Bird lives.
I don't hear any of those bebop guys, and I like all of them. None of them swung quite like Charlie Parker. And that's a Kansas City thing. And yeah, I said it. I said it. It's a Kansas City thing.
Frank, right? I gotta get a picture of you real quick. All right.